Ranger Ava Rodriguez, at the cusp of 31, was a woman meticulously sculpted by precision, responsibility, and an unyielding professional ambition. Her tenure within the venerable National Park Service was not merely a career path, it was a strategically planned, unswerving ascent up a highly structured, fiercely competitive ladder. From her earliest days in the academy, Ava had consistently excelled at mastering regulations, perfecting complex procedures, and demonstrating an unwavering, almost zealous, application of every protocol. Her new assignment, a transfer to a remote ranger outpost nestled deep within the vast, ancient wilderness of Grand Teton National Park, was not just a promotion, it was a critical proving ground, a crucible in which she intended to forge an undeniable testament to her unyielding dedication and disciplined approach. She envisioned her days unfolding with pristine efficiency, meticulous record-keeping, rigorous patrols along carefully charted routes, and the swift, uncompromising enforcement of conservation laws. Her primary directive, as she saw it, was to safeguard the untamed wild from the unpredictable, often destructive, incursions of humanity, managing it with cold, hard data and an ironclad adherence to established discipline. She approached nature with a professional, almost surgical reverence, seeing its myriad inhabitants as vital, interconnected components of an ecosystem to be studied, protected, and preserved, rather than as individual beings possessing unique personalities or emotional needs. Yet, beneath the crisp, unblemished fabric of her ranger uniform and her outwardly unyielding resolve, lay a tightly coiled spring of hidden guilt, a wound so profound it often manifested as an almost pathological need for control. This wound stemmed from a distant, sun-drenched summer afternoon in her childhood, a family camping trip. Ava, then a precocious 11-year-old, had been tasked with watching her younger brother, Leo, a boisterous 7-year-old with an adventurous spirit that often outpaced his caution. For a fleeting, reckless moment, distracted by a particularly intricate spiderweb, Ava had looked away. Leo, drawn by the shimmering promise of a hidden creek, had vanished into the dense undergrowth. Hours of frantic searching, the escalating panic in her parents' voices, the agonizing wait for the park rangers, culminated in Leo being found, bruised and disoriented, with a badly sprained ankle, shivering violently from exposure. Her parents, exhausted and relieved, had nonetheless laid the blame squarely, if implicitly, at her feet. "You were in charge, Ava." The words had burrowed deep, festering into a potent brew of self-reproach and an overwhelming fear of ever losing control again. Her career choice, protecting others and managing unpredictable environments, was a direct, albeit subconscious, penance. Her ranger station itself was less a cozy cabin and more a utilitarian bunker, a small, timber-frame structure nestled so deeply within the park's embrace that it was accessible only by a winding, unpaved road that became utterly impassable with the first heavy snows of late autumn. Inside, it was a testament to stark efficiency, a compact metal desk with meticulously stacked paperwork, categorized and labeled with military precision, a worn but immaculately clean cot, and a small, functional kitchen where she prepared her carefully portioned, pre-packaged meals. Every tool hung on its designated peg, every map was folded with military precision, every surface wiped down nightly. The profound isolation, for Ava, was not a hardship but a welcome balm, a perfect reprieve from the perceived chaos and emotional entanglements of human interaction. It was an ideal environment to focus solely on her rigorous duties to maintain the control she so desperately craved. The vast, jagged peaks of the Tetons loomed outside her window, majestic and indifferent, their ancient silence reinforcing her belief in nature's untamed power, a power that she, through diligent adherence to regulations, believed she could manage and predict. It was a typically crisp, early summer morning, the kind where the high-altitude air still held a keen bite despite the climbing sun, when the profound, almost sacred silence of the park was abruptly and irrevocably disturbed by an uncharacteristic cacophony. Ava was on her routine patrol along the seldom-used northern perimeter road, a winding ribbon of asphalt that cut through miles of dense, old-growth forest. She was meticulously logging wildlife sightings into her tablet and checking the integrity of trail markers, her mind already on her next task. The sun, slanting through the dense canopy of ancient pines and firs, dappled the asphalt in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Suddenly, a series of frantic, high-pitched whimpers, thin and desperate, cut through the low drone of her Jeep's engine. She braked sharply, her eyes, trained for the slightest anomaly, scanning the dense undergrowth beside the road. Her heart, usually so steady, tightened with an unfamiliar unease. A quick scan revealed no adult bears, only a dark, tragically still form further down the road, and the undeniable sound of escalating distress. She exited the Jeep, retrieving her flashlight and holding it ready, though her park-issued sidearm remained holstered, a last resort. She approached cautiously, the fear of an injured predator a cold knot in her stomach. Her breath hitched. Huddled beside the stark yellow lines of the road, beside the undeniably still and massive form of a mature black bear, a tragic, brutal victim of a hit-and-run, its life brutally ended by the very human presence she was tasked to manage, were two tiny, terrified bear cubs. They were no bigger than small golden retrievers, their fur matted with dust, fear, and a terrifying hint of dried blood. One, slightly smaller and rounder, let out a piercing, almost continuous squeal, burying its face frantically in its sibling's fur. The other, slightly larger, more observant, watched Ava with wide, terrified eyes, its lower lip quivering, a silent plea in its gaze. Protocol, etched deep into Ava's professional psyche, dictated immediate, hands-off contact with regional wildlife rescue. No direct interaction. Absolutely no imprinting. These were wild animals, not pets. But a quick radio check confirmed her worst fears. A massive, unseasonable storm front was rapidly rolling in from the west, its dark clouds already closing mountain passes and making roads treacherous. The regional rescue team, based 3 hours away through already challenging terrain, couldn't possibly reach her for at least 2, possibly 3, harrowing days. Leaving them was not an option. They were too young, too vulnerable. They wouldn't last a single night alone in the vast, unforgiving park, exposed to predators and the elements. Her rigid adherence to established procedure warred with a primal, unexpected surge of protectiveness, a feeling she hadn't acknowledged since her brother's accident. "Blast it all," she muttered, the words escaping her lips surprisingly soft, almost a whisper. "Just for a few days. Until rescue can get here." With a deep, resigned sigh, she pulled on thick leather gloves, carefully, gently scooped up the whimpering bundles, their small bodies surprisingly warm against her hands, and placed them in a heavy-duty, specially reinforced crate in the back of her Jeep. Their terrified cries, though muffled by the crate, still echoed rawly in the confined space, a desperate sound that seemed to penetrate her carefully constructed emotional defenses. She named them, the perpetually noisy, smaller one, *Squeak, and the quieter, more observant one, Pip. The initial days at the ranger station were nothing short of a complete, utter affront to Ava's meticulous nature. The cubs, though initially terrified, quickly revealed themselves to be bundles of boundless energy, insatiable curiosity, and an unnerving talent for disruption. Squeak, true to his name, was a constant source of high-pitched demands, his tiny, sharp claws scratching relentlessly at the reinforced crate, demanding food, demanding release, demanding attention. Pip, the more reserved sibling, watched Ava's every move with an unnerving, almost scholarly intensity, his dark eyes seeming to absorb every detail. Once cautiously released into a makeshift, reinforced pen constructed within a secure section of her station's spacious storage room, their true personalities, and their remarkable, troublesome unique trait began to emerge. Their insatiable curiosity quickly morphed into an uncanny, almost unnerving ability to mimic. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Ava would demonstrate how to drink from a water bowl, holding it steady, and Pip would later attempt to hold the bowl with his clumsy paws, spilling water everywhere but learning to tip it. Squeak, observing Ava meticulously use her park radio, would later stand on his hind legs, paws clumsily pushing buttons, letting out guttural "ururp" sounds that sounded comically like distorted radio chatter, a tiny, furry parody of official communications. Her pristine, orderly station, once a sanctuary of control, rapidly devolved into a battleground against adorable, furry chaos. The kitchen cataclysm happened on day 2. Ava, bone-tired from a night of restless cub care and an early patrol, had left her morning coffee mug, half-finished, on the counter for a moment. Squeak, observing her earlier routine, managed to climb onto a low stool she'd forgotten to put away, then, with surprising agility for his bulk, onto the counter itself. He batted at the mug, sending coffee, milk, and sugar cascading onto her meticulously filed patrol reports, creating a sticky, brown, unholy river across her desk. Pip, watching from below, attempted to wipe the mess with his paw, only succeeding in spreading it further, creating abstract art on her official documents. Ava, standing in the doorway, stared at the sticky devastation. A low groan of despair escaped her, followed by a raw, uncharacteristic burst of laughter, a sound she hadn't truly uttered, a full, uninhibited sound, since she was a carefree child running through fields with Leo. It was a chaotic, frustrating, yet profoundly amusing start to her new, utterly unplanned life as a bear cub foster parent. She rapidly discovered that the cub-proofing guides were written for humans with normal pets, not for miniature, highly intelligent, mimicking bears. She had to fashion a robust, indoor-outdoor enclosure for them, converting a seldom-used storage shed and sectioning off part of her yard with double-layered chain-link fence topped with electric wire, unactivated but a deterrent. But no barrier seemed truly cub-proof when curiosity and mimicry combined. Pip quickly learned to open drawers by watching Ava's finger movements, not always successfully, but persistently, often using his nose or a claw. He would pull out spare batteries, tangled wires, even her meticulously folded spare socks, scattering them with an air of profound investigative purpose, as if each item held a vital secret. Squeak, meanwhile, possessed an uncanny talent for getting into her uniform accessories. She'd walk into the living area to find him proudly parading around with her park hat askew on his head, or a pair of her sunglasses perched precariously on his nose, looking utterly ridiculous and utterly pleased with himself, before tumbling over. Once, she returned from a short patrol to find both cubs clambering in the driver's seat of her Jeep, Pip attempting to turn the steering wheel with his paws, while Squeak, having found her park map, enthusiastically chewed on it, attempting to redo it, leaving trails of saliva and teeth marks. "They're trying to drive the whole park, Ranger," she muttered to herself, shaking her head in a mix of bewildered amusement and exasperation. And they're doing a terrible job of it. Her daily routine, once a paragon of rigid efficiency, now revolved entirely around cub feeding schedules, elaborate cleanup operations, and trying to outsmart two miniature, fur-covered saboteurs. Her paperwork, once pristine, now bore indelible paw prints, occasional bite marks, and the distinct scent of fish oil. She found herself talking to them constantly, explaining park regulations as if they understood, reasoning with them. Even reading aloud from her park manual during their sleepy periods, her voice growing softer, less formal. She discovered that Pip was remarkably intelligent, often observing a task once and attempting to replicate it with surprising success, while Squeak was pure, clumsy brute force, learning through enthusiastic, often messy, trial and error. Her only consistent human contact was Old Man Silas, a grizzled, reclusive, and legendary park veteran. Silas lived deep in a remote part of the park, a true wilderness spirit who had been a ranger in the 70s before choosing a self-sufficient life as a trapper and herbalist. He occasionally visited the ranger station for supplies or to deliver a message, his weathered face usually set in a disapproving frown. He was deeply skeptical of Ava's by-the-book approach, viewing her strict adherence to rules as a weakness, a barrier between humans and the true wilderness. When he first saw the cubs, his eyes, usually sharp, narrowed to slits. Interfering with nature, Ranger, he grumbled, his voice like rustling leaves in a dry wind. They ain't pets. Best let nature take its course. These creatures ain't meant for human hands. His words were a cold echo of Ava's own internal doubts and the strict protocol she was violating. Yet, beneath his gruff disapproval, his visits often came with cryptic, wisdom-filled advice, rooted in a deep understanding of the wild's rhythms. He'd leave a small jar of homemade elderberry syrup for their occasional colds, or point out a patch of high-protein berries perfect for cubs, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected task. He represented the true, unmanaged wild, a stark, challenging contrast to her regulated world. Dr. Anya Sharma, the pragmatic and highly experienced wildlife veterinarian who had guided Eleanor through her own unique rescue, communicated remotely with Ava, her voice always calm, professional, and tinged with a knowing amusement. Their thriving Ranger Rodriguez, she'd confirm over the crackling satellite phone. Their weight gain is excellent. But remember, her voice would become firm, they are wild. The goal is always release. No imprinting. Absolutely no humanizing. Anya's words were a constant, professional reminder of Ava's duty, even as Squeak tried to help her hold the phone, his tiny claws tapping against the earpiece, or Pip would try to take notes by batting at her notepad. As summer bled into autumn, painting the mountains in fiery hues, the cubs grew at an astonishing rate, their playful energy escalating with their size. Pip's mimicry became more refined, more deliberate. He could now unlatch simple cabinet doors by carefully watching Ava's finger movements. He often sat beside her desk, attempting to type on her old manual typewriter, his paws clacking loudly, seemingly composing his own park reports. Squeak, still clumsy and prone to dramatic tumbles, found new and inventive ways to get into trouble, often following Pip's lead and then getting irrevocably stuck. He once managed to wedge himself into the station's large recycling bin, emerging moments later covered in discarded paper and looking utterly bewildered, emitting a series of indignant huffs. Ava's meticulous charts, once filled with pristine data, now included highly unprofessional, yet undeniably accurate, notes on Squeak's latest escape attempt and Pip's successful acquisition of office supplies and subsequent shredding. Her hidden guilt, the constant, low-level fear of making a catastrophic mistake that had defined her adult life, slowly began to unravel under the overwhelming, endearing, and utterly personal demands of the cubs. Their innocent, earnest mimicry forced her to see herself through their eyes, her own rigid movements, her repetitive tasks, her tightly wound composure. One particularly frustrating evening, after a long day trying to track a cunning poacher and dealing with Pip having filed her most important park map by tearing it into shiny confetti, she sat down on the floor, utterly defeated, leaning against the cold wall. Squeak, sensing her unusual distress, lumbered over, pushing his large, furry head gently into her lap, then awkwardly tried to pat her arm with a clumsy paw, mimicking her own attempts to comfort him during their first days of terror. It was a pure, uncalculated gesture of empathy, and Ava felt a dam break inside her. She held him close, her face buried in his thick fur, tears finally falling freely, not just for her professional frustrations, but for the profound, unaddressed grief of losing Leo years ago, the accident she had carried as a personal albatross. The cubs, in their raw, untamed existence, in their simple acts of mimicry and affection, were slowly teaching her that some things simply could not be controlled, only embraced. She began, for the first time, to forgive herself. Winter descended early and fiercely, blanketing the entire park in a deep, hushed white that muffled all sound. The cubs, now sturdy yearlings, their muscles powerful and their fur thick, were less mischievous indoors and more visibly restless, watching the snow fall, their wild instincts beginning to stir more profoundly with each passing day. Pip would stand by the window for hours, sniffing the frigid air, his ears swiveling towards the distant, haunting calls of elk or wolves. Squeak would wrestle playfully with him, their mock battles growing increasingly fierce, their growls deepening. Ava knew, with a heavy heart, that their time was coming to an end. Ranger Ben, during one of his rare, snowmobile-assisted visits, his face etched with concern, confirmed it. "They're ready, Ranger," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on Pip, who was meticulously grooming his paw, then attempting to brush his own ear with it, mimicking Ava's own hair-brushing motions. "Almost too ready. That mimicry, it's a concern for their wild survival. But they're healthy, strong. It's time to find them a permanent place." The phrase, too habituated, echoed ominously in her mind, a constant, low thrum of fear. Her love for them meant letting them go, but it also meant fearing if her care had inadvertently harmed their chances of thriving in the true wild. A new challenge emerged as a particularly harsh cold snap settled over the park. Squeak, the smaller cub, developed a nasty cough, far worse than the earlier one. Anya Sharma, on a frantic satellite call, advised Ava it could be a serious viral infection. "You need to get him to the main park vet station," Ranger Anya urged, her voice grim. "As soon as the road's clear enough." The roads, however, were buried under 10 feet of fresh snow. For 3 terrifying days, Ava worked tirelessly, administering medication, forcing fluids, her sleep reduced to desperate naps beside Squeak's shivering form. Pip, sensing his brother's distress, lay curled protectively beside him, occasionally nudging Ava's hand. This period was a crucible, solidifying Ava's protective instincts beyond any protocol. When the snow finally let up enough for a dangerous, hours-long journey by snowmobile to the main station, Ava made the trip, holding Squeak wrapped tightly in a blanket. The vet confirmed it was serious, but treatable, and Squeak made a slow but full recovery. The incident brought Ava and Ranger Ben closer, his quiet support and practical help invaluable. The ordeal also reached the ears of a few distant park personnel, some expressing disapproval for taking such a risk, others quiet admiration for her dedication. The decision for release was agonizing, a constant knot in Ava's stomach. She spent their last 2 weeks trying to teach them basic survival skills, as best she could, by example. She'd scatter wild berries in the snow and point, hoping they'd forage instinctively. She'd spend hours mimicking distant bear calls, her own voice taking on a guttural quality, hoping they'd recognize them as their own kind. She read them stories of wild bears from old nature books, her voice often cracking with raw emotion, knowing these were their last shared moments. The ranger station, once a cold beacon of professional duty, was now a haven of bittersweet goodbyes, each shared meal, each moment of play, infused with a poignant finality. The morning of their release was brutally cold, the snow crisp underfoot, sparkling like diamonds in the pale dawn light. Ranger Ben arrived before true light, his heavy-duty snowmobile equipped with a large, heated carrier designed for transporting wildlife. The chosen release site was a remote valley, miles from any human trail, nestled deep within an untouched portion of the park where a small, established bear population resided, a place of untouched wildness. Eleanor knelt, her heart heavy, as the cubs were gently coaxed into the carrier. She rode in the back, her gloved hand resting on the bars, feeling Pip's soft fur and Squeak's warm, comforting breath. At the valley, the air was still, sacred, biting cold. They opened the carrier door. Pip, ever the more cautious, took a hesitant step out, sniffing the pristine snow, then looked back at Ava with those deep, intelligent eyes, a silent question in their depths. Squeak, with characteristic clumsiness, tumbled out after him, then shook himself vigorously, sending a flurry of snow flying, looking around with a surprised sniff, a small, excited huff escaping him. Ava knelt, tears blurring her vision, falling freely down her cold cheeks, a release she hadn't allowed herself in years. "Go on, my little rangers," she whispered, her voice thick with unaccustomed emotion, using their secret nickname. "Be free. Be wild. Find your way. You belong out here." Pip nudged Squeak gently, then, with a final, lingering glance back at Ava that seemed to hold both understanding and farewell, turned and ambled into the trees, his stocky form disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Squeak, after a final, bewildered glance back, as if wondering why she wasn't following, clumsily followed, his gait still a little wobbly on the deep snow. They were gone. The silence that descended was deafening, cold and vast like the winter landscape, but beneath it, Ava felt an echo of profound warmth. She stood there for a long time, the emptiness in her arms echoing the hollow space that had resided in her heart for years, a space now filled with the vivid memory of 2 small, mischievous bears. Ranger Ben, quietly, respectfully, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, but his presence was a quiet comfort. The ranger station was quiet once more, its surfaces gleaming, paperwork once again pristine. But it wasn't the same. Ava still followed protocols, but her actions were infused with a deeper understanding, a profound empathy for the wild that she had once merely managed. Her meticulous logs now contained brief, personal observations about the wildlife she encountered, not just cold data points. The hidden guilt she carried had not vanished, but it was softened, understood, accepted as a part of her story, not its entirety. She learned that loss was a part of life, and connection, even if temporary, was worth every ounce of risk, every tear. She occasionally found subtle, poignant reminders of Pip and Squeak. A tiny, forgotten toy truck hidden under her desk from their playful raids, a faint, almost invisible claw mark on the kitchen counter where Squeak had tried to mimic her cooking. More profound were the changes in herself. Her crisp uniform felt less like a protective armor and more like a second skin. She started leaving out small, strategic water sources for migrating birds. She began communicating with new, eager rangers differently, sharing not just rules and regulations, but stories of the park's inhabitants, teaching them that understanding the wild meant opening their hearts to its inhabitants, not just protecting them from afar. And sometimes, on her patrols, deep in the ancient forest, particularly as the snow melted and new life burst forth, she would catch a fleeting shadow, hear a distant, playful huff, or see a freshly scratched tree that was just a little too high for a normal bear to reach, hinting at a cub's clumsy attempt to mimic a human climber. She'd smile, a genuine, unburdened smile, a warmth spreading through her chest. She knew they were out there, her little rangers, Pip and Squeak, navigating the vast, beautiful wilderness. Her world was still defined by duty, but now, it was also profoundly enriched by the wild, echoing presence of two mimicking bear cubs who had, without trying, shown her that true understanding and true healing often defies the rulebook, flourishing instead in unexpected bonds and the profound, beautiful chaos of a life truly lived. The shadows of her past had receded, replaced by the vibrant, echoing presence of the wild, and the indelible paw prints they had left on her soul,